Election Day is coming up on Tuesday, November 2nd, but voters are already casting their ballots early this week here at the County Government Building in Plattsburgh. The Clinton County Board of Elections is open every day this week for early voting. Throughout the North Country, voters are heading to the polls to vote for town, village, and city officials, along with highway superintendents, supervisors, county legislators, and in Clinton County District Attorney Andrew Wylie is seeking re-election. Early voting runs through this Sunday, October 31st. Check your County Board of Elections website for the hours the polls are open. And this year on the ballot, no matter where you live in New York, you're going to see at least 5 ballot questions on the flip side, on the back of your ballot. The questions have to do with several issues, but we're going to focus mostly on 3 of them that have to deal with redistricting, the redrawing of congressional and legislative districts, and changes to voting laws here in New York. And helping to guide us through all of this is Jennifer Wilson, who is the Deputy Director of the League of Women Voters of New York State. Our thanks to you. We appreciate you being here with us today.
Of course, thanks for having me.
These are questions on the ballot that, if approved by voters, will result in changes to New York's Constitution. And to do that in New York, to get a question on the statewide ballot, it can be a long and complicated process. How exactly does it happen? What has to happen in order for these questions to get on the ballot?
Yeah, so in New York State, we're not like some other states that have citizen referendums where people can get together and get petition signatures and get questions on the ballot. Here in New York, it's a legislative-led process. So any sort of amendment to the Constitution has to pass 2 times through our state legislature with a statewide election in between those 2 passages. And then we, as the voters, get to approve them in the general election of that year. And then the following year, they'll be added to the Constitution.
And so it can take a number of years for that to play out.
Oh, yeah, because we don't have state elections every year. So sometimes you got to wait an extra year for a state election, and sometimes it doesn't pass right away the second time around. So yes, it can take a very long time to do this, but it's important that it does because this is our state constitution. This is a very important document that leads a lot of policy within New York State. So we don't want to be tinkering with that all the time.
So looking at the questions, number 1 has to do with redistricting and some changes to the independent commission that oversees the redrawing of the congressional and legislative districts.
Yes, and this one, there's no easy way to describe this particular amendment. So in 2014, we adopted another constitutional amendment to create a separate commission to do our redistricting here in New York State. And funny enough, redistricting is happening right now in New York State. This would change some of the processes and procedures of that commission. So all of the uncontroversial things are things that are already in state law or required by the US Constitution, like counting everyone in our district counts and reallocating people who are incarcerated back to their last residence, changing the timeline for the actual redistricting mapping process to happen. The controversial parts are all around the sort of partisan makeup of the commission and basically changing the voting rules for the commission when voting to approve the maps, and then the legislature when voting to approve maps to lower the threshold of votes needed to pass those maps.
And so no surprise, that's why we're hearing from, in particular, Republicans and conservatives who are running TV ads and writing op-eds that oppose the changes. They say that we're taking away the provision that gives the minority parties a say, that gives them a stake in the redistricting process. They say without those guarantees, the Democrats who hold supermajorities in both of the houses will redraw the districts how they want to their advantage, and that critics will be silenced. So do the opponents have a valid point? The League of Women Voters is one of the good government groups that has raised and voiced concerns about that particular part of question 1.
Yeah, we are one of the opponents of Proposal 1, partially because of the fact that we are going to be taking away protections for minority parties, not just the Republican Party, but all of the minority parties, Green Party, Working Families Party, Conservative Party, Libertarian Party. All of those parties will no longer be considered in this process and won't have the same opportunity to have a say into the process. But also, we just think that it's not a great time to do this. We're right in the middle of the process and we're looking to make changes to it. The commission that's doing redistricting is meeting right now. They're having hearings throughout New York State currently. And so we don't think this is a good time to be amending the process that's currently unfolding.
Well, let's jump to questions 3 and 4. We'll come back to 2 in just a moment. They both would expand voting rights in New York?
Yes, so 3 will eliminate the 10-day voter registration requirement, and 4 will eliminate the need to have an excuse when requesting to vote by absentee ballot. These are both things that are also in state law. So our state law requires a 25-day registration deadline, and state law will still require an excuse to vote by absentee ballot. And it's so confusing in the Constitution and in state law. But if the legislature decides to lower the deadline to register to vote or eliminate it altogether to have same-day voter registration, that can really help increase turnout in New York State. We are definitely on the lower side when it comes to turnout here. Some of the cons is this can be a lot more work for boards of elections. It's going to require more poll workers if we have in-person same-day registration, people to process not only the ballots, but also now to register people. So that can be more work for boards of elections. On the no excuse absentee ballot side, this is something that people have relied upon during COVID, using COVID as their quote unquote excuse to vote absentee and have really enjoyed it. Certainly the idea of telling the government, hey, I'm going to be in the hospital or I'm going to be away, I need an absentee ballot, feels very invasive. So you'll still have to request an absentee ballot with this. You just won't have to tell the Board of Elections why you're asking for an absentee ballot. This could be more burdensome to boards of elections, but it can also help increase turnout.
And as far as getting rid of the 10-day requirement, do many see this as a step towards same-day voter registration?
I think most of us see that as the next step forward, or at least even having registration during the early voting period would be really helpful.
I know there's criticism from some who believe that allowing same-day voter registration could lead to voter fraud, that people would be voting who shouldn't be voting.
We don't see that super often. It's very easy to catch in-person election fraud, actually, somebody registering at multiple locations. In states that do have same-day voter registration, they have a whole post-election process where they compare, who's voting at every single site and making sure people aren't registering multiple times. I would say it's more of a concern for the no excuse absentee ballot one, because typically when we do see the very, very rare instances of fraud, it tends to be mail fraud. Again, we usually catch those, but people, if they have concerns, those are totally valid concerns to have.
Now, question 5 deals with civil courts in New York City, so we really won't worry about that. But back to question 2, we've heard from environmental groups on this. A yes vote would change the Constitution, add that clean air, clean water, and a healthful environment are a constitutional right in New York. That sounds simple enough. We know that environmental groups are backing it and say that it may help deal with issues like contaminated water in wells or things like oil trains that carry crude from Canada through communities in the Adirondacks and even eventually end up in the heart of Albany, transporting that oil to barges that then ship it on to the refineries. But this question is also controversial.
Well, I think there's a few things that make it controversial. Firstly, healthful is not defined anywhere, and that's a very loose term. What is a healthful environment? A lot of opponents also believe this could lead to a lot of frivolous lawsuits, because essentially people will have the opportunity to sue businesses or even the government if they feel that this right is being violated, if they feel that a business or a corporation is polluting their air or water or not giving them a healthful environment. So a lot of business organizations are opposed to this proposal.
All right, remember, the questions are on the back of the ballot. You've got to flip the ballot over. And thank you, Jennifer Wilson with the League of Women Voters, for helping us to sort them out and understand them as we head to the polls next week. Thank you, we appreciate it. And you can go to your County Board of Elections website to find hours for early voting.